I'm live. Good morning. Cheers. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to those joining virtually as well. So our message this morning, we're going to be focusing more or less on impermanence and death. Okay, so this is going to be a message that I think I consider very timely, especially since we're all going to die. And the spiritual path, as we've been taught by many different traditions, is really a preparation for death. So as we've grown and gone through our stages of development, we've gone through these rites of passage and initiations and death and rebirth cycles and endings and beginnings of chapters within our life. But it all does culminate to that threshold point where we take our last breath and who knows what happens next. And so all of these esoteric and wisdom traditions are basically saying you have to cultivate a state of mind that actually takes you beyond that region of unknowing into knowing. This direct experience of what is the afterworld has to become already incorporated within your psyche while you're still seemingly living within the biological life. And that's why the Sufis have that wonderful phrase, die before you die. So when we die before we die, we've undergone that transformation, that metamorphosis that will be going on when we die physically, but we've already encountered that after-death state in the here and now. And now we can easily transition. And so we're going to be talking about this. And one of the ways that the Buddhists, anyway, will have us learn about these after-death states is to deeply meditate on impermanence. Because one of the things that really blocks us from this ease of transition when we die is that we cling to certain things. Our state of mind is still fixating on the physical world. That's why you have the idea of hauntings and ghosts and, trapped souls and all the lore of the supernatural where people can't transition, they can't go into the light, they have unfinished business, they have traumas and problems that they're back in the home of where it took place, and so they have to get Ghostbusters or whatever goes on there to get these spirits to move on. And really, these are parts of our mind that still cling to these ideas, identities, and personalities that we can't let go of. And so if we start to realize that everything is impermanent and, like I said, deeply meditate upon it, we begin to loosen our grip on this delusion of thinking that the permanent is, rather the impermanent is permanent. This is where we begin to kind of slip out of the limitations of the mind. And so we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be using a bunch of different teachers to bring us to this path of the ease of dying and the state of impermanence. So first off in our list is Rumi. And he has a couple of poems that we'd like to look at. And this one is a bit tongue-in-cheek. He says, "The light you give off did not come from a pelvis. Your features did not begin in semen. Don't try to hide inside anger, radiance that cannot be hidden." So what does he mean in somewhat crass terms? He means you're not your biological body. That who you really are is a light that transcends the physical world. So your beginning did not happen with copulation. Your beginning did not happen when your biological life came into manifestation. This is a vehicle, and the one who's animating the vehicle is not biological. It is this light from beyond. And then Rumi has this one. "Don't run around this world looking for a hole to hide in. There are wild beasts in every cave. If you live with mice, the cat claws will find you. The only real rest comes when you're alone with God. Live in the nowhere that you came from even though you have an address here. I love that line. Live in the nowhere that you came from, even though you have an address here. And Wayne Dyer was very fond of Rumi, and I remember him giving talks where he would say, you come from the nowhere to the now here, right, your address, and then you're going to go back to the nowhere. And so Wayne Dyer was playing on this poem from Rumi. And he says, Rumi continues, that's why you see things in two ways. Sometimes you look at a person and see a cynical snake, and someone else sees a joyful lover, and you're both right. So the important takeaway here, again, is we come from nowhere to this address here, and as a result, we see in two ways. We have a spiritual vision, and we have a physical sight. And we oftentimes completely obliviate our spiritual vision because we become so hypnotically identified with the five senses and the physical sight. So that's why he says, Rumi, you own two shops and you run back and forth. Try to close the one that's a fearful trap, getting always smaller. Checkmate this way, checkmate that. So in other words, when your physical sight, which is a shop, right, your biological life, your address here is one shop. Your higher self, which is nowhere, right? Let me riff on this for a moment. You know, they say that the higher self is very much like this non-locality, like consciousness is non-local. And the way that they usually illustrate this is when you turn on your radio and Beethoven is playing on the radio, if you were to take apart the radio, Beethoven isn't in there with a little piano. There is a transmission that apparatus is picking up, transducing this invisible field of information and energy, and transmitting it through this instrument called a radio. Your biological vehicle is very similar to this. They've known this, they use this illusion many times, that you're a transducing mechanism. And so your higher self is a non-local field of information and energy. And it appears to be coming out of this instrument called a biological body. But you're not here. You're nowhere, right? Because nowhere means that you're beyond the confines and laws of physics, time and space and direction. There is the one listening right now that is native to nowhere. And that's what we are here to discover. That's what doesn't die. Like Krishna says in the Gita, you can't cut this soul, this non-local consciousness. You can't wet it, you can't burn it, you can't dry it. It doesn't die. You're the non-local entity. But we are identified with the radio. We insist we're the radio. And we only live within the basement of our being in this little shop called the body with this address, this name, this form. Right? And so these higher teachings are all about getting you to calm the body, quiet the mind, and begin to slip out of the identity patterns and limitations of thought that we have as the body, so that we can begin to taste again this deathless state, this immortal being that we are. So you have eyes that see from that nowhere, and eyes that judge distances of how high and how low. So you have a spiritual eye that is in that higher state of consciousness that sees from the nowhere, and you have eyes that judge and evaluate and rank and split things up and categorize and define, right? Two very different ways of seeing. You own two shops and you run back and forth. Try to close the one that's a fearful trap, getting always smaller. Keep open the shop where you're not selling fish hooks anymore. You are the free swimming fish. So what does he mean by close up the shop where you're not selling fish hooks anymore? So when we are identified as the biological body, this is my interpretation anyway, we're needy. And so we're always sending out our fish hook to catch something. It's a form of predation. We're preying upon the world to get our needs met. That's why when we live in this world, what we really do see, and this is part of our meditation this morning, is death. When, everything that we use to live upon, we have to murder first. Everything we eat comes from an act of murder. Right? So everything that is alive kills in order to live. And so this idea of sending out your fish hook is to live within this flatland of death. And everything here will eventually be preyed upon, whether it's by disease, old age, whatever it is. You will eventually succumb to the Lord of death, right? So this is a very helpful meditation to begin to realize this inevitable fact. You're going to die. And, this is this is one of the riddles that was given to Yudhishthira. So Yudhishthira was one of the characters in the great Indian epic Mahabharata. Yudhishthira was the emperor, he was the king, but he was going through his own hero's journey at this stage in the story. He was exiled from his own kingdom. His wicked cousin and uncle took his throne. And him and his 4 brothers were exiled. And they were chasing a deer in the forest, so the story goes. And the brothers went ahead and left Yudhishthira behind. And they became very thirsty, and they came upon this pond. And they heard this voice saying, "Don't drink my water." And they were like, "We don't see anything here except a swan." So they decided to drink the water, and they all fell down dead. And come to find out, this swan, who will later reveal itself to Yudhishthira, because Yudhishthira comes upon his brothers and sees them all by the pond's edge, dead. He sees the swan, and the swan said, "I told them not to drink." And he says, "You're no swan, what are you?" He says, "I'm a yaksha." And a yaksha in the Vedic lore, the ancient lore of India, is a forest demon. But this was no ordinary forest demon. This was Yamaraj. This was the Lord of Death. And so Yudhishthira is now in this bargain because the Lord of Death says, if you answer these riddles, since you're a righteous man, I will bring your brothers back to life. So he asks him a series of questions. And this is what Yudhishthira was asked by the Lord of Death. First question. I had it all laid out here so nicely. Here it is. Again, this is, anyway, I kind of know him anyway. So Yamaraj says to Yudhishthira, what is the greatest wonder? And Yudhishthira says that every day we see countless beings dying, and yet somehow we think we're immortal. So this is the greatest wonder, that everything and everyone around us are dying. And somehow we feel like this doesn't apply to us, that we're not going to die. And this is really that gap within our life where we kind of go unconscious. We don't want to think about it. If you look at our culture and the way that we treat death, it's prettied up. You know, you go to your loved one's funeral or friend's funeral, and usually they're all done up with makeup and hairdo and their pretty dress and everything else. And in other cultures, you get to see what happens when you die. You get to see, especially in the Buddhist cultures and the Hindu cultures, the decomposition. So when the Buddha first began to teach his disciples, and Lisa and I talked about this yesterday, and she was like, that's not necessary. But when the Buddha began to teach his disciples, he would have them go sit in what are called the charnel grounds, where all the corpses are. And in the early teachings of the Buddha, you're taught to meditate on the different stages of decomposition, to really look at the body as it begins to bloat because of all of the acids that are being released. It begins to turn purple. It begins to get decomposed. Worms begin, maggots begin. All of these things begin to eat the body away, and then you'll start to see the muscles and the bones, and everything begins to fall away until there's just the skeleton left. And the Buddha's saying, do you want to identify as that? Is that who you really are? Look at it. Look at that. Is that you? Is that all that you are? And do you see how unconscious we are? We carry this skeleton around, this bag of bones with all of the internal organs and the 5 kinds of fluid, and we really think that this is me. And it is an ignorance of not knowing oneself. This was the Buddha's point. This is unsettling. This is one of the reasons why we like to put makeup on death and decorate it. We don't want to face it. We don't want to look at it. It's uncomfortable. In fact, I would submit that we as Americans anyway, maybe Euro-Americans, we are in an arrested stage of development. We are like adolescents that always want to have fun, feel good, and just be carefree, right? And we try to incorporate our spirituality into this adolescent mindset. What works for me, my truth, me, me, me. And this is a very immature way of being because we're not really seeing the totality of what's here, and we begin to ignore the unpleasantries instead of taking them as the inevitabilities that they are, such as death. Okay? Anyway, I knew this would be a feel-good message. A little more from Rumi. This place is a dream. Only a sleeper considers it real. Then death comes like dawn, and you wake up laughing at what you thought was your grief. But there's a difference with this dream. Everything cruel and unconscious done in the illusion of the present world, all that does not fade away at the death waking. It stays, and it must be interpreted. All the mean laughing, all the quick sexual wanting, those torn coats of Joseph, they change into powerful wolves that you must face. The retaliation that sometimes comes now, the swift payback, it's just a boy's game to what the other world will present to you. You know about circumcision here, it's full castration there. And this groggy time we live in, this is what it's like. A man goes to sleep in the town where he has always lived, and he dreams he's living in another town. So Rumi just told us that this world is a dream. And when we die, we wake up from this dream of being in this world. But we take our state of mind into that after-death state. That's all we take. This is why spiritual cultivation is really priority. What really got me on this message this morning was this idea of, we're facing so many different trials and difficulties and societal breakdowns and uncertainties and chaos. This is where you really have to turn up the heat in your spiritual practice. This is where your practice really needs to become top priority, because it's really the only thing that's going to take you through. Everything else might come and go. This is one of the reasons why we have to focus on impermanence. We don't know. It's not that you live in fear and anxiety. That's the whole point of meditating on impermanence. You come to rest in contentment, which was one of Yamaraj's questions to Yudhishthira. What is the greatest wealth? And Yudhishthira said, contentment is the greatest wealth. Doesn't matter what you own. Doesn't matter where you live. If you're content, deeply content, then this world can come and go. It can be destroyed right in front of you, and yet you can stay unmoved within the center of the storm. You found this spiritual rest or contentment. And that state of mind, as the Tibetans would call it, is like a diamond. And that state of mind survives death. And you can come to rest secure no matter what, that when you transition, you will find peace on the other side. But what he's saying, Rumi, here, is if we're living by the lower mind with the lower impulses and desires, and we stay within this animal appetite kind of a life, of dog eat dog and sending out our fish hook to get what we want, when we transition, we live in an alternate reality where that can become greatly magnified, and we will meet ourselves in different forms. Like Rumi said, we will meet the wolves that we were in this life, but they will appear as other beings, right? So this is interesting, and it gets back to what we were saying. And this groggy time we live in, this is what it's like. Notice also he calls this world groggy time. Are you groggy this morning? So this groggy time we live in, this is what it's like. A man goes to sleep in the town where he has always lived. And he dreams he's living in another town. In the dream, he doesn't remember the town he's sleeping in his bed in. He believes the reality of the dream town. The world is that kind of sleep. The dust of many crumbled cities settles over us like a forgetful doze, but we are older than the cities. So these are the two shops again. We fall asleep as that non-local entity, the Christ mind or Buddha consciousness, our spirit soul. We dream, and here we are waking up in the five sense realm of the physical body, forgetting all about the fact that this is the dream figure of the dreamer that we are in the spirit realm, right? And we are groggy here because we don't have self-knowledge. And we are looking at this sleepy world trying to get what it is we think we need from this dream figure's perspective. And he says, close down that shop. Awaken to your spiritual self and know that who you are can never die. And therefore, in this world, there's nothing to fear. He says humankind is being led along an evolving course through this migration of intelligences. And though we seem to be sleeping, there is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream. And that will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. So even though we are seemingly alone in the body-mind, dreaming in this world, there is something else that calls us home. It's that same voice I would again submit, that calls you to these kinds of teachings. There's something in you that wants to hear this, that needs to hear this, because you're being called beyond the dream. You want to wake up. You want to know yourself. So this is the teachings of the mother, Mira Alfasa, the consort or partner of Sri Aurobindo. And this again is, the point of this teaching this morning is kind of to do a couple of things, is to get us present to the impermanence of life in this world, but it's also to stir up our ardor, our intense focus on the path, that we realize that this is really the only value within this world, is to wake up. So she says this to her students. For you have been told repeatedly, it has been dinned into your ears. You know that you have a divine consciousness within you, and you can sleep night after night, and play day after day, and learn day after day, and not have the enthusiasm and intense will to enter into contact with yourself. Yes, with yourself here, within. This indeed is beyond me, she says. The first time I knew, and nobody told me this, I knew it by experience. The first time I knew that there was a discovery to make within me, well, that was the most important thing. This had to be put before everything. And when I found, as I said, a book, a man, just to give me a little indication, to tell me, here you are. If you do this, the path will open before you. Why, I rushed headlong like a cyclone, and nothing could have stopped me. And how many years have you been here? Half asleep. You think about it, of course, from time to time, especially when I speak to you about it, at times when you read. But that ardor, that will, which conquers all obstacles, that concentration, which overcomes everything. She leaves it at that. I couldn't help have a little wry smile, thinking about, just how often we hear these instructions, and then how often we easily dismiss them and go back to sleep and see this world as the end-all and be-all of our life, and this physical body as the self. Like, one of the things that happens when we encounter authentic teaching is it shocks us, just like the charnel ground meditation on the corpses. It's shocking. It's off-putting. It's something that sears into your mind, and you can never not remember it. And that's what this spiritual teaching is designed to do. It comes first as a shock, as a confrontation, as an interruption to the hypnotic drone of this life and this world and this identity. And if you don't feel off-put, if you don't feel shocked, if you don't feel startled by it and confronted by it, then I would also submit that it might not be the authentic teaching. It might be another form of the adolescent spirituality, where you're fine the way you are. You're perfect. You're divine. Yes, you're divine. But it's the lotus hidden in the mud. That's got to grow. And not only does it have to grow, then we will discover the jewel hidden in the lotus. But there is some work to be done, my friends. There is commitment. There is drive. There is the desire to wake up, as Jesus says in the Course, above all else. And this world will slam your back to the wall at one point or another, if it hasn't already. And where are you going to turn? consider me the canary in the coal mine this morning, because I'm just putting my ear to the ground, so to speak, and it just seems like, Kansas is going to go bye-bye in one way, shape, or form. And we have to really begin to prioritize, not as little children and adolescents, but as mature. And we have to begin to wake up to that something that transcends death and be it and bring it, because that's what this world's going to need. It's always needed it, but more en masse than ever before. Too intense? So a little bit from Gurdjieff's work. This is an excellent book. If you're interested in the Gurdjieff work, this is the title of the book by Kathleen Riordan Spieth. She was a little girl. Her parents were in the work. She grew up around Gurdjieff. Very interesting lady. I'm just going to quote a couple of quotes that she puts in the book. One is from Muhammad, the prophet, and his quote is, "Man is asleep. Must he die before he wakes?" This is where the Sufis, the esoteric Muslims, get die before you die. And here's a quote from Gurdjieff. Listen to this. And remember, this is the old-time lingo. Man is man, woman. If a man could understand all the horror of the lives of ordinary people who are turning round in a circle of insignificant interests and insignificant aims, if he could understand what they are losing, he would understand that there can only be one thing that is serious for him: to escape from the general law, to be free. What can be more serious for a man in prison who is condemned to death? Only one thing: how to save himself, how to escape. Nothing else is serious. So this was the story, of the very familiar story of how Siddhartha, the Buddha, got his comeuppance, right? He was born into palace life, and this is what we all strive for if we are living within the ordinary consciousness. He was born into it. Total luxury, total pleasure, abundant wealth, not a care in the world. And what the story, the legend is showing you is, this is what most human beings consider having arrived. Being successful. Finally getting what life has to offer. The Buddha was born into that. Had it from the start. In fact, his father was so persistent in keeping the Buddha within this pleasure reality that he wouldn't let anything in any way reflect impermanence or death. All the plants would be changed out. All the old people would be replaced with youthful people. So the Buddha grew up in a reality where nothing ever reflected the diminution of life. And so this was to keep the Buddha enthralled within identifying as the prince and not in any way pursuing his deeper destiny. So eventually the story goes where Buddha wants to go outside of the palace, so he coaxes his chariot driver to take him out. And we know the story, yes? He sees a sick man, and he doesn't know what that is. He asks his chariot driver, "What is that?" "That's a sick man." And his next question is very important. "Will I get sick?" And the chariot driver says, "Oh yes, my Lord Prince, you will get sick. Everyone gets sick." Well, take me home. I don't want to go to the party. Just takes him home. Another time they go out, he sees an old man. Will I get old? Oh, yes, my Lord Prince. Everyone gets old. Nobody can escape getting old. And take me home. And the final vision was the dead man laying on the side of the road. Will I die? So notice he's coming out of this dream, right? This is what the answer to Yudhisthira, the question of what is the most wonderful marvel in the world. Endless human beings are dying every day, and the rest of us all think that we're immortal. So we have to take into the consideration, as the Buddha did, will I die? Will I grow old? And this type of inquiry leads to the what they call in Buddhism the revulsion with the world. Like you eventually see that the world does not offer you any happiness. It is a place where you have to kill to live. And when you begin to see that, you will want out of samsara, right? This endlessly repeating rebirth and death. That if you really examine the way the world works and how it operates, you will become nauseous, as Jean-Paul Sartre had said. You will have an existential crisis because you will see the utter meaninglessness of this world. And there will be nothing within your reach as a human being that will be able to save you from this nausea. So that's why we turn to the liberation teaching, whether it's the Buddha Dharma or esoteric Christianity or Sufism or A Course in Miracles. Some kind of liberation teaching has to become our utmost priority. So the final leg of our journey this morning is taken from the words of my perfect teacher, from Patrul Rinpoche. And he was a Tibetan Buddhist master. He lived in the late 19th century, and just a wonderful, wonderful being. And these were the transmitted teachings that he recorded from his teacher. And this is what Patrul Rinpoche has to say to us this morning regarding death and impermanence. Although we know that we are going to die one day, we do not really let our attitudes to life be affected by the ever-present possibility of dying. We still spend all our time hoping and worrying about our future livelihood as if we're going to live forever. We stay completely involved in our struggle for well-being, happiness, and status, until suddenly we are confronted by death, wielding his black noose, gnashing ferociously at his lower lips and baring his fangs. Right? Poetic. Poetic of the inescapable force. Then nothing can help us. No soldier's army, no ruler's decrees, no rich man's wealth, no scholar's brilliance, no beauty's charms, no athlete's fleetness. None of this is of any use. We might seal ourselves inside an impenetrable armored metal chest, guarded by hundreds of thousands of strong men, bristling with sharp spears and arrows, but even that would not afford so much as a hair's breadth of protection or concealment. Once the Lord of Death secures his black noose around our neck, our face begins to pale. Our eyes glaze over with tears, our head and limbs go limp, and we are dragged willy-nilly down the highway to the next life. Right? And when he's talking about this in metaphor, what the Buddhists will say is when you die, your state of mind and all of the actions and reactions that you brought to the world are called karmic winds. They are forces that you've set in motion, cause and effect, on a very subtle energetic level. And when you drop the body, these karmic winds, your state of mind, push you to where that frequency, that gravity, that quality of life has been displayed by you. You can't escape yourself. That's why this idea of cultivating insight, compassion, loving kindness, this is all in preparation for death. Right? To know how to navigate this unseen realm is vital. Right? Otherwise, you're led willy-nilly by the noose of the Lord of Death. Death cannot be fought off by any warrior, ordered away by the powerful, or paid off by the rich. Death leaves nowhere to run to, no place to hide, no refuge, no defender or guide. Death resists any recourse to skill or compassion. You can't plead your way out of this. Once our life has run out, even if the medicine Buddha himself were to appear in person, he would be unable to delay our own death. So, reflect sincerely and meditate on how important it is from this very moment onwards never to slip into laziness and procrastination, but to practice the true liberation teaching. The only thing you can be sure will help at the moment of death. I may have shared this before. My mom had remarried, and my stepdad, I was 5 years old when my stepdad came into our family. And he was a really loving, considerate, kind man in those early years. And as the time progressed, things began to crack, and the marriage broke up, and he became more of a stranger than a stepdad, and there was a lot of ill will that had crept in over the years, and so total estrangement by the time I reached my late teens, and I never saw him again. And he passed away of cancer a number of years ago, and it was shortly after he passed away that I had a very vivid dream. And it was him in a car on Donald Ross Road, and I was holding a memento from like the early 70s that represented those good years. And I looked at him from the passenger side of the car as he was driving. And I said, "Whatever happened to us?" And I looked at it with such anger, sadness, and disappointment, and I threw it out the car window. And he says, "No, no, no, don't do that." And like in the dream world, he reached out and grabbed the memento from off the road as he kept driving and took it back. And then he turned, if you know this area of Jupiter or Juno, he turned from Donald Ross, rather it was US 1, and he turned to go towards the Donald Ross Road Bridge. And as we're driving to the bridge, the car disappeared. And he's there only with his eyes burning into my eyes, as real as I'm here before you. And he's pushing on my chest as I'm being pulled towards the bridge. And he's saying to me, "I'm sorry. I was drinking a lot. I didn't mean to do those things. Please forgive me. I want to be like you." And not me as the ego, but I really think what that meant was putting liberation teaching as a priority. And as he's pushing me, before I go to the bridge, he's saying all of these things, and there was such love for him at that point that when he let go, I came back into the body, woke up, and there was no grievance at all for this man anymore. It was like total healing of all of those years. And again, as I reflected on the dream, it was like we do oftentimes. I mean, we go through different phases of dream, but there's a part of the dream state, if we're aware of it or if we're given this insight, that I think we're in the after-death state. We can interact with other levels of reality within this bigger dream, as Rumi calls it. And the bridge of Donald Ross Road was a symbolic thing my mind was making of these higher energy states, my interpretation. So as I'm going from the after-death world back to the physical world, I have to go through this bridge. And so the Donald Ross Road Bridge. But the whole point is that I know, regardless of how irrational it might sound to some, that I made contact with that being that was my stepdad. And in that contact, there was total healing and recognition that there, in that after-death state, there is processing, there is oftentimes repentance and humility and the dawning of a deeper understanding and insight that can take place, right? But the idea, though, is that the journey need not be painful. Right? This is the whole point of the liberation teaching. If he had that insight prior to, he could have saved himself a lot of time and a lot of grief. Right? Things could have looked very differently. So a little bit more from Patrul Rinpoche. Meditate single-mindedly on death all the time and in every circumstance. Right? This is a major stage in the meditation practice of Buddhism. Meditating on the impermanence of everything, that everything that's born, everything that comes into being will eventually fade and die and disappear. Everything. Right? However, just to meditate on death will not suffice. The only thing of any use at the moment of death is the liberation teaching. So you also need to encourage yourself to practice in an authentic way, never slipping into forgetfulness or loss of vigilance, remembering always that the activities of samsara are transient and without the slightest meaning. It's all meaningless. In essence, this conjunction of body and mind is impermanent, so do not count on it as your own. It is only on loan. All roads and paths are impermanent. So whenever you are walking anywhere, direct your steps toward the liberation teaching. Wherever you are. So now he goes through a litany, and we're going to take this into our meditation this morning. Right, we're going to meditate on impermanence. So listen to this and use it as fuel for your meditation. Wherever you are, all places are impermanent. So keep the pure Buddha fields in mind. Food, drink, and whatever you enjoy are impermanent. So feed on profound concentration. Sleep is impermanent. So while you are asleep, purify sleep's delusions into clear light. Wealth, if you have it, is impermanent. So strive for the riches of the liberation teaching. Loved ones, friends, and family are impermanent. So in a solitary place, rouse the desire for liberation. High rank and celebrity are impermanent. Speech is impermanent. Faith and desire for liberation are impermanent. So strive to make your commitments unshakable. Ideas and thoughts are impermanent, so work on developing a good nature. Meditative experiences and realizations are impermanent, so go on until you reach the point where everything dissolves in the nature of reality. And then we end with this. Meditation on impermanence is therefore the prelude that opens the way to all practices of liberation. Patrul Rinpoche says this: when he was asked for instruction on how to dispel adverse circumstances, Geshe Potowa, answered with the following words: think about death and impermanence for a long time. Once you are certain that you are going to die, you will no longer find it hard to put aside harmful actions, nor difficult to do what is right. After that, meditate for a long time on love and compassion. Once love fills your heart, you will no longer find it hard to act for the benefit of others. Then, meditate for a long time on emptiness, the natural state of all phenomena, right? The nowhere. Right? Everything comes from the nowhere, takes up a temporary address in the now here, but goes back to the nowhere. So that's the emptiness. It's this empty fullness, right? That's always manifesting, but then what manifests goes back to the source. So what's the source? It's this empty fullness, right? The shunyata. So you're going through stages. First, see all things as impermanent. Everything is going to die. Everything's impermanent. Your relationships with your friends and family. Notice how that precedes love and compassion. Only when you get a clear knowing and a deep taste of impermanence can you truly be loving and compassionate, because you're not doing it to a body. You're seeing that these bodies are ephemeral. They're not what's real here, right? The nowhere is transmitting through the body. And you're in association with that inner essence of the being when you're in compassionate states of mind, according to these teachings. And then finally he says, once we have such conviction about impermanence, all the ordinary activities of this life come to seem as profoundly abhorrent as a greasy meal does to someone suffering from nausea. So when you really see what the world is made of and how it operates and what it really is for, it's like a greasy meal when you're nauseous. You have an instinctual revulsion to it. Right? That's when your mind has been tamed and clear. If your mind isn't tamed and clear, that greasy meal is very enticing. And then finally, and listen to this, we'll end here. Impermanence is everywhere, yet I still think things will last. I have reached the gates of old age, yet I still pretend I am young. Bless me and misguided beings like me, that we may truly understand impermanence. So take a few minutes to deeply reflect on the nature of impermanence. Notice how impermanence permeates everything. Your breath comes and goes. Bodily sensations are flickering and changing second by second. Thoughts arise and then become something else. Sounds come and go. Everything is impermanent. From the smallest scale to the largest galaxy. Notice the ubiquity of impermanence. And so when faced with such a inescapable situation, detachment to what's arising, wherever and whatever, is really the key to mental health and peace. To cling to something that is inherently going to change and to demand it doesn't change is the recipe for suffering. So this heat of desire that clings to the impermanent, whether it's pleasure or pain, feel that cool rain of detachment quench the fire of desire and put your heart into a state of contentment. Blue bag will go around. Here comes the cool rain of detachment. Thank you, Bill. And blessing the offering and charging it with the intention that it brings happiness to all beings. So it is. Amen. All right, let's seal the deal. Finding that quiet place of the nowhere within the center of the heart. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever we are. God is. Amen. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Thank you.